This morning, we were looking at how we stop uncontrollably recurring rebirth such that it never recurs. And we have to realize that it's not some impossible me, impossibly way of existing me, that is undergoing rebirth, experiencing true suffering and generating more true suffering, and that we want somehow to liberate that impossible me by that impossible me getting a correct understanding. So that is no such thing. We do exist, but we project onto how we exist an impossible way of establishing that. We can't be established as existing on several different levels of subtlety. But when we believe that the impossible way of existing that we imagine, and it feels like that, when we believe that that actually corresponds to reality, then, as we saw through the mechanism of the 12 links of dependent arising, we have disturbing emotions, disturbing attitudes, compulsive behavior that has a whole mechanism of how that builds up tendencies and potentials and so on, and more disturbing attitudes and more disturbing emotions activate those tendencies, and then you get a compulsion that throwing karma, it's called, that takes the, that has the continue obtaining as its basis tainted aggregates, body, mind, feelings, emotions, etc., which will be the basis for experiencing the suffering of unhappiness and the suffering of change, our ordinary happiness. So in order to have a true stopping of that, what we need to do is to refute, which means to prove that there is no such thing as this impossible way of existing of me. So no such thing as an impossible me. We say that in short. And when we understand that there's no such thing, then there are no disturbing emotions or attitudes arising with which we would try to make that impossible me secure. And we wouldn't have compulsive behavior as a futile effort to try to make that impossible me secure. So we wouldn't build up more karmic potentials, more tendencies. We wouldn't activate the ones that are already there. And there would be a true stopping of uncontrollably recurring rebirth, such that it never recurs again. Of course, we do continue. The mental continuum, there's no beginning and no end. You can understand that in terms of how cause and effect works, and there's the whole analysis of the voidness of cause and effect to help us to understand that. Things can't have an absolute beginning and an absolute end if it's going to be non-static and non-degenerating moment to moment. But that me, which does exist, that conventional me, will always have a basis. That conventional me is non-static, it's changing from moment to moment, affected by things. And most fundamentally, what we have to understand is that it's imputed on a network of ever-changing aggregates, body, mind, feelings, distinguishing other mental factors, and so on, all of which are changing at different rates. A very, very complex network. And the self which is imputed on that, likewise, is changing moment to moment, affected by things. It is not partless, it has many parts, because doing different things and imputed on different what's the word? different clusters of these components of these networks that's going along, and it can only be known on the basis of imputation appearing at the same time, being known simultaneously, and there is nothing on the side of that basis, findable characteristic feature, that even when it's known simultaneously with the basis, that from its own side has the power to establish that there's a me. Me is merely imputed on ever-changing network of 5 aggregates. That's the conventional me. Conventional me will be imputed on tainted aggregates, and then eventually we want to get rid of them, and they will be imputed on untainted aggregates that are not mixed with confusion, not received or generated because of the whole mechanism of 12 links based on unawareness. And as a liberated being, there'll still be limitations because the mind will still make things appear in an impossible way, but we won't believe it. So, not generating more karma or more rebirth, samsaric rebirth. As a Buddha, those limitations will be removed as well. Achieve a true stopping of that, so the mind will, because of the habits of grasping for true existence or impossible existence, because we get rid of that. That was what causes the mind to make things appear still in this impossible way. So when things don't appear in these impossible ways, as if self-established, so like encapsulated in plastic and establishing itself all by itself independently of causes and conditions and mental labels and all of that, then you see the interconnectedness of everything. When you see the interconnected of everything in terms of what's no longer happening, what's presently happening, what's not yet happening, then you understand cause and effect, how what is happening now in terms of anybody is derived from what's no longer happening, of previous actions and so on. And on the basis of what's presently happening, you can see what is possible in terms of not yet happening. The result of what I might teach somebody, that not yet happening results, so that you can, with skillful methods, decide what's the best way to help each person to attain liberation and enlightenment. So, what we need to do is to understand and cognize or perceive straightforwardly, not through the category of voidness and so on, but just straightforwardly, there's no such thing as this impossible me. Total absence. And to do that, we need to refute, understand the total absence of each successive layer of what's impossible. To just go to the deepest level of what's impossible without refuting the grosser levels will be misunderstood. It's misleading. And it tends to become trivialized because you don't really understand it. It's like, for instance, trying to generate in Lam Rim the advanced scope of motivation without having sincerely the initial and intermediate upon which it's based. Then the advanced level becomes something completely different. So we spoke about the grossest level of the impossible me, so-called coarse level, which is doctrinally based. And it is based on having been taught and believed that it was correct, a view of the self, the Atman, the soul, as asserted by one of the non-Buddhist Indian systems. And we were taught this and believed in it either in this lifetime, active, or in some previous lifetime, considering that beginningless rebirth. So there's some sort of tendency, some sort of instinct of that. Might not manifest in full in this lifetime, if we're not taught these other systems, but parts of it tend to manifest in the form of incorrect consideration, considering that I am static, the eternal youth, or whatever, the part of these wrong views, incorrect views. But what we need to do is to refute the whole package of the assertion of these non-Buddhist Indian schools, right? So that package was speaking in terms of a self or a soul, that I am established. What am I established as? I'm established as an Atman, a soul. That's me. And that soul is, according to these theories, these assertions, static, which means that it is unaffected by anything. It always remains the same. Buddhism also asserts that the self is eternal, no beginning and no end. So that's not the issue here. The issue is that it always remains exactly the same, never changing, unaffected by anything. And it is a monolith, which means it has no parts, size of the universe or a tiny little spark. No parts. And it is something which is independent, which can exist separately from a body and mind, from a basis, and according to most of these theories can therefore be liberated and exist in some sort of transcendent situation as a liberated soul, with no body and no mind. So this is what we are refuting. And often we have this feeling that I'm the eternal youth, or, I'm always the same. I get up in the morning and here I am again. Same me. Or that we've just had enough of everything, and I just say, as you're dying of terminal cancer and pain and stuff like that, I just, wish I didn't have any body, any physical body. Just be free of all of that. Wouldn't have these problems. Because if there could be a me that would exist independently of a body or a, mind, Alzheimer's type of mind. So, the refutation of that, well, first of all, the whole process of meditating. First step is that you have to recognize. What does recognize mean? Recognize isn't the best word. Recognize implies that you already knew it. Now you have to recognize it again. But distinguish the self to be refuted before you can refute it. The example that's always used is that if you can't see the target, you can't hit it with an arrow. So you have to be able to distinguish. Remember, we had the aggregate of distinguishing that impossible way of existing. Now that becomes very interesting. How do you distinguish it? What are we focusing on in order to distinguish the impossible way of existing? So what do you think we are focusing on? We're focusing on me, conventional me. And what we are distinguishing here is how it appears to exist, what it appears to be, what it feels like, what we think about that me. So that we have to distinguish between, what it is and what it isn't. So we distinguish. Okay, it feels as though there's a static me. This is what I've been taught. This is what I believe. that that I'm a soul. And according to some views, the Charvaka view, that soul is identical with the mind or the body is variant here. So that's just me. And when the body dies or the mind dies, it's finished. No rebirth, no karma. And you don't experience any effect of your behavior. Then the other view, the views of the other non-Buddhist Indian systems, is that this Atman, this soul, me, is something that has come into the body, so the body is its habitat, its house, living inside. You know how we have this image of a cartoon of a me sitting in my head with the microphone talking, the author of the voice. So it's come inside, it's living inside me. Sounds like an invasion of alien creatures, doesn't it? But anyway, horror science fiction movie. And it...
Homunculus.
Pardon?
Homunculus.
Yes, homunculus. And this is, that's me, and I want to liberate it, free it from this prison. But meanwhile, I'll enjoy it. Have fun with it. That's the deluded view. That it's so wonderful and clean and beautiful, and I'll use it for fun or for profit, something like that. Pardon?
Would you please give those, if you would mention the name, those Indian schools which...
The Indian schools that we're dealing with are particularly... Yes, what we are refuting, for instance, is the Samkhya school, with Samkhya, which would assert that the self does have a quality of knowing, but it is not the same as mind or consciousness, and it can be liberated in moksha, and it doesn't know anything, basically. But it's just knowing, and it leaves behind body, mind, etc., which is prakriti, which is perturbations of primal matter made up of the three gunas, the three qualities of rajas, sattvas, and tamas. So it's the Samkhya view, and the other view that the two main views, although they're subsidiary views, is the Nyaya view, Nyaya Vaisheshika school, which is asserting that there is a self that can be liberated that has no awareness, no mind, no consciousness, and that just sort of connects and uses a brain and uses things to know, but then it can be liberated and, basically nothing going on, doesn't know anything, no consciousness. So those are the two variants of whether the liberated Atman has awareness or doesn't have awareness, but both of them can be liberated in moksha separate from everything else. Those are the main views. And then there's the Charvaka, which says no rebirth, and so on. Now, we have distinguished what is the object to be refuted. Then that self to be refuted has some relation with the aggregates. It can either be totally identical with them or separate from them. If we're talking about two ping pong balls, either there's one ping pong ball or there's two ping pong balls. Either the same ping pong ball or they're two different ping pong balls. If they're not, well, the whole idea that they're ping pong balls is ridiculous, not referring to anything real. So we have this Atman, the self, and the aggregates, the body and the mind, and feelings and distinguishing and mental factors and so Either it is one and the same, only one thing, and remember, one means totally identical. I use the example of Alex and Alex. Alex and Alexander are two, even though they refer to the same thing. Alex, Alexander, and me, those are three. Just me and me, that's one. Alex and Alex, that's one. Alexander and Alexander, that's one. So either totally identical or totally different, totally separate. So now you look at the consequences of what it would mean if the self and the aggregates, the basis, not the basis here, it's the home, where it's living, are the same thing. I am the body, I am the mind, or are they two different things? And you examine, are there any contradictions here in asserting that that self, which is unaffected by anything, doesn't change, has no parts, and can be independent of a body and mind, whether there's any contradictions between that and the assertion that they're either one with the aggregates or different, separate from the aggregates. So the first position is that they are one with the aggregates. So we no longer believe in that, with the three qualities, that it can be independent. So this is the Charvaka view. And if the self and the aggregates are totally one and the same, then it's contradictory with the assertion that the self is static and doesn't change and has no parts, because the aggregates obviously change. The body changes. You grow from a child to an adult. You get sick, and so on. If the self was totally the body, identical with the body, that doesn't make any sense. And there could be no parts. So if I lost my arm, well, how could you lose part of the self if the self is identical with the body and the body has no parts? Or I lose my memory if I'm the mind. I'm no longer me? Now, that doesn't make any sense. So that view that this type of self, static, partless, is identical with a body and mind, doesn't make any sense. So then you examine the other alternative, that they're completely separate. So if they're completely separate and different, and that the self can exist independently as well, and it is static and unaffected by anything, if it's unaffected by anything, it can't do anything. Because if it does something, then it changes from not doing it to doing it. And partless. It couldn't do many things. So how does it make any sense that there is that type of self inside me that is controlling and making use of the body and talking inside and pressing the buttons and making it move and making decisions and stuff like that, and enjoying, whatever pleasure you get from the body? That doesn't make any sense, because then it's doing something, so it's changing. So it contradicts the assertion that that self is unaffected, static, never changes. And the fact that we can do many things at the same time, as in see and hear and walk. We can multitask. That means they're parts. So you can't have, otherwise seeing is hearing, which is an absurd conclusion. So you can't have that type of self with these characteristics that is totally separate from the aggregates. Because of that, these two possibilities, and there are only two possibilities, you have to understand the logic of it. If there's only these two possibilities, either these two things are one thing or they're two things, and if they're neither, then something is wrong about the whole conceptual framework of this. Then you focus on no such thing. So what you have to have is this line of reasoning, and you come to a conclusion, no such thing, and you have to be very decisive about it. Really no such thing. You have to really believe it. And then it has to be accurate, that you understand why there's no such thing, and what it is that we say that there's no such thing of as. And then that appearance that you have, that the mind projects, that you know, I am that. You just cut it off. No such thing. Bah! Like that. You know, His Holiness describes it as, you know, really quite decisive. No such thing. And when you focus on no such thing, what appears? Nothing appears. Well, you always meditate with your eyes open. In the Tibetan tradition, when we do these type of meditations, there are specific meditations in which the eyes are in one position or another, but we're not talking about specific, we're talking about in general. In general, the eyes are just looking down, loosely focused, the direction of the floor, described as in the direction of the tip of your nose, but you're not cross-eyed looking at your nose. You're just looking down, loosely focused. It's not that you're staring at the floor to see if you dropped your contact lens. And what you're focusing on is no such thing. So you're not paying attention to the visual image of the floor. The more and more you get absorbed in no such thing, you're getting absorbed in no appearance. So nothing. And remember what I was saying, what we described before, when I see no apple on the table, what do I see? I see nothing. I see an absence of an apple. But what does it appear as? It appears as nothing. But I understand that nothing as an absence of an apple, not as an absence of an elephant on my table. Although it would look the same. It could be it's the absence of everything, which actually is then used in much deeper analyses. But in any case, let us not go in that direction of further analysis. So, we understand no such thing. So we understand what it is in absence of. So that is what's called total absorption. Jeffrey Hopkins translated as meditative equipoise. Okay, it's another translation. Totally absorbed on that. Now, with the understanding, no such thing. It's not that you're just staring at empty space. And it looks like empty space. Now, you have something that is usually translated as post-meditative period. Misleading translation. It's subsequent realization. Literally, your subsequent realization or subsequent attainment, understanding that you attain subsequent to that. So it has to be subsequent to that, and either you're still in meditation or you're not in meditation, so it could be either. Is that, again, now there's the appearance. So the appearance is that it appears like this impossible me, but implicitly we know there's no such thing. We're no longer focusing on no such thing, an absence. You know, explicit means that it appears. Implicit means it doesn't appear. So explicit is that it appears like, but we know it's like an illusion because, you know, it only appears like that. Doesn't correspond to anything real. Doesn't even refer to anything real. Like an illusion, like a dream. And implicitly, we know that it is devoid of existing in impossible ways. So that's our subsequent attainment. And you can continue to focus on that in meditation, which is certainly recommended and done. And it could also continue when we are meditating on something else. It could continue in daily life.
You said implicitly we know what?
We know that what appears is like an illusion or like a dream. That it appears solid, but it isn't. And that's very helpful, actually, to realize that. And it's recommended in so many different, you know, texts, lojong, attitude training and so on. Somebody says, I'm going to give you 1,000,000 krona next week. And you just take that as a dream, like a dream. When it's actually in my bank account, I will believe it. But you say, I'm going to give it to you, and then the next day they say, oh, but my bank won't let me transfer it, and so, I can't give it to you. And if you took it as an illusion, like a dream, you didn't take it totally seriously, as if it was referring to concrete reality. It was just, what somebody said, nice intention. So then it is like the birth and death of my child in a dream. The child was born in the dream, the child died in the dream. Neither of them referred to anything real. You're not upset by it. Very, very helpful if you can actually, live like that. It requires meditation. Meditation means building it up as a beneficial habit, which means repeating over and over again, thinking about it over and over again, perceiving. I use the very simple example of we're always looking for the perfect partner. Like from the fairy tale, the prince or the princess on the white horse. That is going to be, just perfect. And there's no such thing. And we meet somebody and we project onto them that they are the prince or the princess. And then we get very upset. This is a good example of these disturbing emotions based on something that we have been taught the fairy tale. And you believe that there will be, my prince or my princess on the white horse, the perfect one. Or if you use Plato's image, I'm just a half, and the other half who will complete me in all ways. Then we will be one. So then you project it onto somebody. And then you get very, very angry when they don't live up to that. Why aren't you there all the time for me? That type of thing. And so what we have to realize is that, there's no such thing. That myth, that fairy tale is not referring to anything real. There's still the person, the partner. It's not that the partner doesn't exist. But the partner doesn't exist as the prince or princess on the white horse. So what you're always focusing on is no such thing. There is no prince or princess on a white horse, so how can I possibly expect that this person's going to be that? And then you just deal with the reality of the person, just a person, with good qualities and shortcomings, like anybody. You get it? So what you're focusing on is no such thing as Prince or Princess Charming, no such thing as this Atman asserted by, as is asserted by these other schools that I might have been taught and believed. Yeah.
If I understand correctly, the no such things refers to all the illusions, the creations of our mind.
No, the no such things don't refer to the projections or the illusion. We perceive them. It is a representation of something that doesn't exist.
Yes.
And so what is absent is an actual referent object that corresponds to what we project. There is the projection. That's what you perceive. Like you perceive a dream, or you perceive a magician's illusion. You do perceive that.
Yes, but
it doesn't, what it corresponds, there's nothing behind it, backing it up is the expression that's used. There's nothing backing it up of a real Prince or Princess Charming.
But you're saying there's still a person.
To a person.
There's my imagination that this person is a prince, and that's what doesn't exist. But
a prince, but the person exists.
There is a person, but this person, should I regard that person as a dream too?
No, the person is, there is a person. The person is not a dream. They may appear like a dream, but there is a person. There's a difference between, and this is asserted quite clearly, there's a difference between killing a dream person and killing a live person.
Yes.
Those are different. So somebody in a dream and somebody in waking life, they're not the same.
So if I can see that person as being not a self, a concrete self, a monolithic self, but something that is changing all the time, that is undergoing the same causality process as everything else, I will have it will be easier for me to relate to that person without...
Right, it will be easier to relate to that person, that's true, if we can understand that they are changing, they're non-static, they are not monolithic, they're just imputed on the aggregates. But then, so that understanding will free us from a certain level of disturbing emotions, the disturbing emotions based on that. And a certain amount of suffering that would come from our compulsive behavior that would be based on that. This is my sacred body, and this sort of stuff. However, there's still further levels to be refuted, and this is what we're referring, that, nevertheless, there's a self that is self-sufficiently knowable. I want you to love me, as if there was a you that could exist separately, be known separately from a body and mind and feelings and so on. And even if we refuted that, there's something special in you that makes you you, that, I want to be loved by you.
And that's also an illusion.
That also is an illusion.
Yes. Yeah. Is that...
But based on each of these, you're going to have, more and more subtle, disturbing emotions, attachment and anger and so on. But they will be, what should we say, the energy in a sense. Maybe not the energy, but gross, subtle, subtlest, disturbing emotions. Yeah.
Yeah, as I see it now, I think about like expectations, that you have expectations, and so should one think, if you have expectations about, for example, a partner, should one think then, okay, I should not have these expectations because they are not like this person really are, or should you think like, I accept that the expectations are there, but I know that it's just an image I got, like, that is not real?
Well, first of all, we try to do this without a dualistic thing of I should, you know, the bad me who is stupid me who's thinking this, and the clever me that says, you know, that's stupid, stop it. So I should, you know, just stop it. So that we have expectations. You know, you have a projection, and then you expect that they are going to be like that projection. You know, this person is always, you know, is my perfect other half. It will complement me in all ways. Really be interested in everything that I'm interested in. And then they're not. And so, you know, there's that expectation that they will be. So you realize that that expectation could never be fulfilled because what it is based on, assuming that, you know, they're the perfect other half and always going to be interested in everything that I do, compliment me is ridiculous. It doesn't refer to anything real. Nobody's like that. Now, we will still, you know, it takes a great deal of familiarity to stop that habit of projecting it and, you know, believing it. So first, what we'll stop is believing it. It takes much longer to stop the projection. So what happens is that we take another example. You know, my child is going to always, you know, if they're going to be out late or whatever, that they will call me and tell me that, you know, they're going to be out late and that they're okay. So that the child, you know, you project onto the child that the child is always considerate and always, you know, is going to do that. And then we have the expectation that they're going to do that. And when they don't, we get really worried and upset and angry. Disturbing emotion. So when you know, it's 11 o'clock or whatever the time that you've set and they haven't called, and you project that, you know, well, they're the obedient child and they must always call, and then you expect that. So that's coming up. Then you see, well, that's ridiculous to expect that. It would be nice if they did, but you can't demand that somebody is going to do it. And just because they don't call doesn't mean that they have gotten into an accident or they have been kidnapped or, you know, something like that. Could be that they are busy, they're in a party, or they didn't, you know, look at the clock, they didn't realize it was 11 o'clock. It could be that the battery on their phone is dead. It could be anything. So if you don't have the expectation, you don't have the disappointment. And that, of course, is one of the main instructions for proper meditation. Meditate without expectations and no worry that, you know, well, is something going to happen in meditation? And, you know, you worry, well, will it happen? And it's not happening. You know, French horns in the background and rainbows and stuff like that. And there's no disappointment.
What did Hopkins call this post-meditation?
Hopkins calls it post-meditation.
Yes, but you had a certain...
Subsequent realization.
It was not
Subsequent attainment or subsequent realization. Jetop in Tibetan.
It was not the word you said before.
Pardon? No, there is the two phases, the total absorption and subsequent realization. Jeffrey calls it meditative equipoise and post-meditation.
No, that was the first one. Okay, just course of post-meditation. Thank you.
Pardon?
Thank you.
Yeah. See, this is a real issue with the study of Buddhism, is that each translator has their own terminology. And all the translators, myself included, have, pretty much grasping at, our own terminology. Mine is correct. Mine is the best. And nobody is willing to compromise. So in the meeting of translators, we have given up, the idea that we're going to standardize terminology in any of our languages. Now, what I have proposed, which is, I think absolutely necessary at some point, but will be a tremendous amount of work to do, although it is doable, would be to have a giant online database in which, like Google Translate, you have, two windows, and you type into, and each of them have a toggle thing. So you can, in this window, I have this term, and you type it in, and you toggle that this is a Jeffrey Hopkins term. And then the other window, whose terminology do you want it in? Berzin terminology, or Alan Wallace terminology, or Pema terminology, or whatever terminology, and you set the toggle to that, and you click, and you get what the equivalent is in the other translator's terminology. It's only on that basis that you could ever possibly put together the information that you read from one, in one book with what you find in another book. That, I think, is absolutely necessary if we're ever going to deal with the maze of, translations that we have. But what it will require is translators being consistent in their use of terminology. And maybe they won't be consistent in all their work, but then you could toggle a specific book of theirs. At least be consistent in one work that you do.
Could you be consistent?
Pardon?
What about a work like Uttara Tantra Sastra?
Work like, I can't hear you.
Uttara Tantra Sastra, Trilema.
Trilemma.
Yeah, Trilema, Uttara Tantra Sastra. This work.
Trilemma, I find that is fine. I don't have a different way of translating that.
Okay.
There's some words, it's not that every translator disagrees on every single term.
Okay.
Some of them are very good, and some, occasionally it will happen that one translator will find that a term that another translator uses is better than theirs.